Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the Borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thank you for joining us for Newsmakers. I'm Casey Counts. Wednesday is the third anniversary of the mass shooting at the Cielo Vista Walmart in El Paso. The suspected shooter remains jailed in El Paso awaiting trial. Recently, District Attorney Ivan Rosales made public comments about the trial date, and that led to a gag order by the judge presiding over the trial. Today, we're joined by Bob Moore, President and CEO of El Paso Matters, who was in the courtroom when that order was issued. Bob, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Let's start by understanding where we are in the process and what did the district attorney say that led to this reaction by Judge Sam Medrano?
I think most importantly, as you noted, it's 3 years since this awful tragedy in El Paso. The accused gunman is facing both federal and state charges. The judge in the federal trial had issued a ruling that he planned to begin that trial in January of 2024. So now we're looking at more than 4 years out. After hearing that ruling, the district attorney, who has no role in the federal charges, just in the state charges, announced that she would like to have the state trial in the summer of 2023. That's not her decision. It's a decision that's made by the judge, usually after extensive consultation with prosecutors and defense lawyers. So the judge, after she made these announcements, called for a hearing. He did not say what it was for. We do know that the district attorney invited members of the media, as well as families of the victims, to be here at this hearing. My guess is she thought that maybe he was going to set a trial date. Instead, the judge, whose name is Sam Medrano, spent the half-hour hearing very deeply criticizing the district attorney. I've covered courts for almost 4 decades. I've never seen anything like this. He criticized her for making public comments about the case in ways that implied, in his view, that she had the decision-making power. And I think he was concerned that she was trying to usurp the power of the court. And then he also deeply criticized her for saying that she wanted to have a trial next summer when her office had not filed a single piece of paper in the case since she took office in early 2021. And so he just excoriated her for not handling the case properly, for what he referred to as grandstanding in making pronouncements to the media. And Judge Medrano said that in 30 years on the bench, he had never issued a gag order in a case, but he was doing so in this case, and he ordered all parties in the case, not just the district attorney, but also the defense lawyers and potentially witnesses in the case, not to talk to the media. That's very unusual, even for a high-profile criminal case. But the judge was very, very angry, and I think completely caught the district attorney off guard. She stood up and addressed the court, and he just dressed her down. There's no better way to put it.
And what was her response to that?
She's very dishonest or deceptive in many ways. She said she had put out a statement to the media that included that it wasn't her decision, it would be the judge's decision. That was not true. And then she even told the judge that he was incorrect, that her office had filed paperwork. And the judge says, well, you must have done it this morning because I was reviewing the case file last night and you haven't done anything. Needless to say, that's not an advisable approach with a judge ever, which I think only upset him even more. After the hearing, she obviously had no statements to make because she was now under a gag order. So we really can't go ask her how she's feeling these days. But I think she was very defensive and very dishonest in some of her answers, which does not bode well.
Now, when Rosales took office, there were some staffing changes, including attorneys that were working on this case. Is there any indication that those changes may have impacted the work that had already been done or work that should have been done since then?
I think it's important to understand that this is an office that has struggled for 2 years on a variety of fronts. And to be fair, I think the pandemic played a role in that. But then again, so did her decision at the outset of her administration to purge a good number of the lawyers in the office who she saw as aligned to her predecessor, Jaime Esparza, who had been district attorney for almost 3 decades. But also think she thought that these people were aligned with a gentleman named James Montoya who had run against her. So she swept out a lot of experienced attorneys. That included the people responsible for handling this prosecution. She did submit a grant request to the state for funding, which she actually called a press conference to talk about. She did not mention in the press conference that a good part of the funding was to hire additional lawyers to handle this case. And Judge Medrano even brought that up in the hearing, saying the worst kept secret in the courthouse is you're trying to hire lawyers from out of town to handle this case. So this is an office that has shown all kinds of signs of struggling. As we've noted in our reporting, multiple judges have now criticized the district attorney and her office for not being prepared for cases. That led in one case to a capital murder charge being dismissed. And so there are a lot of concerns about how well that office is functioning. But I think no concern can exceed the prosecution of probably the most notorious crime in El Paso's history, which was the murder of 23 of our neighbors while they were out shopping at Walmart.
You mentioned earlier the suspect is facing both state and federal charges, and both could result in the death penalty if he's convicted. According to reporting by your organization, Rosales has said her office would seek the death penalty. Have federal prosecutors indicated whether they intend on doing the same?
They have not, and frankly, that's one of the things that's causing a little bit of heartburn in a trial setting. Joe Biden has been, even before he was president, a skeptic of the death penalty. During the campaign, he criticized President Trump at times for a real rush of executions that the Trump administration had done leading up to the election. Merrick Garland, who's the Attorney General, has also expressed some concerns about the application of the death penalty. So they have not made that decision. If they were to seek the death penalty at the federal level and get a conviction, it might eliminate the need to have a trial on state charges. But if the federal government decides to take the death penalty off the table, I think that'll increase the pressure on state prosecutors who are answerable to voters to pursue a trial that would include the possible death penalty.
So what concerns will you be keeping your eye on around this situation as we move forward?
There are a lot of issues that we need to be conscious of. One, every suspect has a right to a fair trial. This mass killing was the most painful moment in El Paso's existence. So finding a jury who can sit in a way that would not prejudice his right to a fair trial will be difficult. They may have to move the trial out of town. That came up at the hearing that Judge Medrano had conducted. The same may be true for the federal trial, so we want to watch that. But I think most importantly, at the local level, we really want to keep monitoring the performance of the district attorney and how well her office is moving forward with this case. There are a lot of warning signs out there right now that things aren't going well. Obviously, there's a lot of evidence in this case. So it's a difficult case to try. I think a lot of people in the general public see it, the matter of guilt, as probably a very cut and dried thing. This is a person who had left an online screed before he went in. There's a lot of evidence there, but that same amount of evidence, when you think there were hundreds of people in that store that day, all potential witnesses, you had 23 people murdered, 22 people injured. It's a very complex case, and I think one of the things that's worth noting is that when this case goes to trial, it will be the deadliest mass shooting to ever go to trial in this country. As we know, most mass shooters at the end of their crime spree either kill themselves or wind up being killed by a police officer or a bystander. It's very rare to actually have a trial. So there'll be obviously a lot of attention on this beyond just El Paso, and also because of the motives behind it, the allegations of white supremacist motivation. There's going to be a lot of interest in this case, and for so many reasons, we as a community have to get this right, and that's what we're going to be watching more than anything else.
Now, it goes without saying that mass shootings and gun violence in general continue to be major concerns. And after the shooting in El Paso, there seemed to be some level of commitment to a change in policy. But Texas lawmakers responded by actually loosening gun laws and increasing access to firearms. Can you expand on the legislature's actions?
I think it's worth noting that the members of the El Paso legislative delegation felt in the immediate aftermath of the August 3rd, 2019 shooting that they had a commitment from Governor Abbott and other Republican leaders to seriously review some of the gun laws and to look at ways that we might modify some things to impact these shootings. That did not happen, obviously, and quite to the contrary, Texas took an opposite approach. I think the most notable change in the law is that they eliminated the requirement that to carry a concealed weapon, you had to go through a permitting process that included a background check, that included some period of training. Now, basically anybody can legally carry a firearm, assuming they're not a convicted felon or face other barriers. You can also open carry weapons if you want. Texas still allows 18-year-olds to buy long guns, which can include guns like AK-47s, which were used, versions of those were used in the El Paso shooting and the Uvalde shooting. One of the common threads we're seeing in the Buffalo shooting, as another recent example, is that a lot of these mass shootings involve 18 to 21-year-old men using these long rifles that they can gain access to. That's still perfectly legal in Texas. So I think from just an examination of guns, we have not made any changes in Texas other than to loosen the restrictions. I do remember on August 3rd, 2019, sitting in a press conference with Governor Abbott, Mayor Margo, some other community leaders, and Governor Abbott made great point of discussing mental health needs and kind of blaming mental health concerns for these mass shootings. Texas has made some minor inroads on the mental health front, but not in any way that would significantly have impacted the situation in El Paso.
How did local lawmakers respond to the legislature's actions?
They were angry. And I think it goes beyond just local lawmakers, too. I think a lot of people in El Paso felt betrayed by these promises, but it became very clear as the 2021 legislative session rolled around, which was the next legislative session after the El Paso shooting, that this was going to be a session very much aimed at invigorating the Republican base. And so you saw a number of actions in addition to the loosening of gun restrictions that were really meant to appeal to the Republican base. The redistricting decisions that were made, some decisions around education and what could be taught in the classrooms, and probably most notably issues around LGBTQ children and how we approach them. And so guns was a major part of that. And it was clear that the legislature was not going to consider anything that would not appeal to the Republican base as part of the reforms package that was offered. I'm not sure we're going to see anything more in 2023, even after the Uvalde shooting. I think the conversation is going to be about hardening schools and school security. There's no indication at all that placing some tighter control on access to weapons is anywhere on the table right now.
One local lawmaker, U.S. Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, has been vocal on this issue and others. A photo of her being arrested at a protest for abortion rights has been circulating. Obviously, this issue is one that connects the El Paso and Las Cruces communities in a very important way. Abortion remains legal in New Mexico, while it will not be under most circumstances in Texas. What do you envision over the coming weeks and months for this region?
It's going to be an extension of something that we've seen in place for a long time. We've got a patchwork of abortion regulations in Mexico, Texas, and New Mexico that has always kind of led to this improvisational approach to access to abortion care. And now that's going to become even more important. I think the biggest impact is going to be in Las Cruces, which is going to find itself on the front lines of this national debate over the future of abortion. Las Cruces is a city that's close to, or relatively close to, a lot of major communities that no longer have access to abortion. One sign of that, I think, is that the clinic in Mississippi that was at the heart of the decision that struck down Roe versus Wade decided to relocate to Las Cruces, in part because it's somewhat accessible to people in Mississippi, and that's really stretching the definition of accessible. But you're going to see, I think, an expansion of abortion providers in Las Cruces, and you're also going to see an expansion of protest efforts against those organizations, and also an increase in these crisis pregnancy centers that have proliferated in Texas and other states with a strong pro-life culture. I think they're going to more and more try to set up in New Mexico. So I think a city like Las Cruces is really going to be on the front lines of how this nation addresses abortion going forward.
Beto O'Rourke recently began a 65-county state tour around Texas in his hometown in El Paso. You mentioned that the governor's race is looking different today than it was just a few weeks ago. Tell us how.
So part of it goes back to issues we've just talked about. In a typical year, Greg Abbott would be a prohibitive favorite to win re-election. You have a Democratic president, and in midterm elections, the party in power often faces challenges. Those challenges are magnified greatly this year because of the economic crisis that the country's facing, especially around inflation. All of these are conditions that really should benefit Greg Abbott. But he's all of a sudden found himself in a much tighter race than a few months ago. And I think things like the Supreme Court decision striking down Roe, the mass shooting in Uvalde, which is just the latest in a number of mass shootings that have occurred in Texas during Abbott's governorship, which is not to say he's responsible for those shootings, but he certainly has been governor and is in charge of how the state responds to those shootings, so has some accountability for that. I think those kinds of issues, on top of what happened in the winter freeze in 2021, where a lot of Texas was left without power, people died, again, in part because of decisions around regulation that Abbott and other Republican leaders have made over the years. All of those have come together to sort of cause the public in Texas to reevaluate Greg Abbott a little bit. I think he still would be viewed by most observers as the likeliest winner in the fall, but it's a much, much more difficult election than I think even he figured that he would be facing a year ago.
Let's get back to the district attorney's office for a moment. There has been another major concern over changes in the approach her office is taking regarding domestic violence. Your organization has heard concerns from advocates and attorneys alike. One of the changes was doing away with a dedicated domestic violence unit. What was Rosales' justification for that?
We're in the midst of I think, a healthy conversation in this country about prosecution and who should be prosecuted and how aggressive we should be in going after people. And Rosales' statements that she's put out, and I want to point out that she just tends to put out written statements. She's not very friendly with media in general, doesn't want to ask questions directly, but the statement she's put out has basically said she doesn't believe that we need to lock up every person who is charged with domestic violence, that there are certainly cases where you want to let people go so they can continue to raise funds for their family and things like that. But a lot of her critics will say that that's just an excuse that she's invoking because of some changes that she's made in the office. We mentioned earlier that she lost a lot of personnel, some of whom she dismissed, others who just didn't want to work for the office anymore after she came in. So she's lost a lot of experience. We've had long delays in bringing cases to grand juries, which is a requirement under Texas law. So a lot of people who have been jailed under domestic violence charges have been freed, not necessarily through a deliberate decision by the district attorney, but rather just a failure to bring the case to a grand jury, so that judges have no power to keep people anymore. So as a result, we've seen a steep decline in the number of domestic violence cases being prosecuted. And it's worth noting that El Paso has been held up as something of a national model over the years for how you respond to domestic violence. The prior district attorney, Jaime Esparza, had his office very aggressive in going after domestic violence suspects, even when the victim didn't want to testify. This district attorney, Yvonne Rosales, is much more cautious about doing that and bringing charges if the victim won't testify. It is obviously more difficult to win a conviction if the victim's not testifying, but it's not impossible. So there are these major policy decisions that she's made, I think, without any real conversation among the public. She certainly didn't campaign on these issues. So these are changes that are being made and are slowly kind of coming to light as advocates get involved in looking at these cases. So she's faced a lot of criticism from domestic violence advocates for undoing kind of these years of programming that the El Paso DA's office has done. It is worth noting that she has also won praise from some defense lawyers for being more even-handed in her approach to some of these cases too.
Bob, while we have a moment left, I'd like for you to address another issue that you've been following that El Pasoans who have a mortgage or pay rent are struggling with. In the last 2 years, the El Paso Central Appraisal District has done 2 revaluations of properties. Normally they would do one every 3 years. Tell us what we're learning from these valuations.
Not surprisingly, property values are skyrocketing, which, if you're getting ready to sell your home, or you want to tap into your home equity for a loan, maybe a good thing. But the biggest impact of these rising valuations is that people's property tax bills are going up. And we did some research earlier this year that indicated, there are some low-income neighborhoods in El Paso where the average home value has doubled in the last 2 years under the Central Appraisal District calculations. Governments have some power to reduce the tax rate to offset that. But what we're seeing is home valuations rise much more quickly than, say, commercial properties. We're seeing a shift in the property tax burden more and more to homeowners. And homeowners have always borne the bulk of the property tax burden in El Paso. And now it's getting more and more difficult. So this year, we may see, even with some reduction in property tax rates from local governments, we may see that the tax bill on a typical home go up by several $100s. As we tend to get the reports in from what local taxing entities are going to do. That's something we're going to watch real closely. We still have the city and county governments and the hospital district to weigh in yet. The city council recently asked the city administration to go back and look for ways to reduce the property tax bills even further. But the city portion of the tax rate, or the tax bill in particular, has just really shot up in recent years because of decisions that local government has made. I think a lot of times these local governments will want to make the Central Appraisal District the bad guy here and saying, oh, we're not doing it. It's just these nasty guys over here who are raising the home values. But the truth is, it's these elected bodies that wind up determining how much tax we pay, and they can make good arguments for it. I think it's worth noting that governments are facing the same inflationary pressures that homeowners are. The cost of their services are going up. So striking a balance between paying for the services that people want while also keeping tax bills at a level people are comfortable with is always in tension, and I think it's even more so right now.
All right, Bob Moore, President and CEO of El Paso Matters, thank you very much for your time today, and congratulations on your induction into the Texas Newspaper Foundation Hall of Fame last month.
Oh, thank you very much. It's kind of you.
And that's our time for this week. Join us on KRWG Radio every weekday, morning edition from 5 to 9, Fresh Air at 11, and that's followed by Here and Now from noon to 2, with All Things Considered from 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd like to hear from you. Email us with story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Casey Counts. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Newsmakers.